So I was here last in this very location in the summer, summer of 2020, and it is completely different. This is one thing that I love about returning to the same places, and nothing to do with photography at all, but just seeing how completely different landscapes are just from season to season. It is incredible. In the summer, all of these ferns and reeds and heathers were in bloom, and it was like an absolute jungle getting through them. I'm telling you, it was tropical in the summer, and now it feels a lot more open. It feels more like a moorland, but it's good for the walk. Anyway, a real warm welcome back to the channel, guys. Actually, it is quite mild. It's sitting about 8 degrees, absolutely piping hot compared to what it has been obviously throughout winter. Quite pleasant actually, I must admit. With that being said, we've got rain and we've got wind, and I must admit I've missed it a little bit. I feel like where I live, at least, the weather's been quite settled and pleasant over the past few weeks, so it's nice to be back out in the elements, in the rain. We've got the waterproofs donned. We're living the dream. Today I want to touch a little bit upon aperture and f-stops, and why I believe that we, myself included, especially as landscape photographers, can be a little bit obsessed with always having to shoot in that sweet spot between f8 and f13, something like that, depending on your camera. And yeah, I want to give probably a couple of reasons today why I think it's okay that we can open up our apertures, and actually sometimes where it might actually be better. So let's crack on. Alright, so let's get into it. Let's get straight into it here. Look at this scene. Actually, I'm on my way up to a peak called Cloffer Pike. If anybody watched a video that I did in the summer when I went up this mountain, you remember I came over this little stile here and I said one day I'll come back and grab a shot. Now this, as I've been saying so often recently, it's not going to be the best shot in the world, but I want to get into apertures and why I believe we should allow ourselves to shoot at sort of open apertures a little bit more often. Because this is a wonderfully creative type of photography and type of landscape photography, but you just don't really see it that often, you know, and I definitely don't do enough. Like I always say about these videos, I'm often making them just to tell myself, just to give myself a little bit of a reminder and some advice. So what it is really, this first one is all about playing around with depth of field. And yes, of course, as landscape photographers, we always want to shoot at f9, f11, f14, these sorts of things, so we can get a nice depth of field throughout the image whereby everything is in focus from front to back. So if we were going to do that here, you know, generally speaking, I'd want the style pin sharp, I'd want the hills in the background pin sharp, Morecambe Bay, I'd want the grasses down it, you know what I mean? Whereas sometimes I think it's nice to just do the complete opposite. So this first one, just more as a means of an example really, is going to be very, very simple. And it's just really going to be a straight shot of this style. So I'm going to focus on the style, and there we go, f4. So I'm deliberately shooting at f4. In fact, I'm going to zoom in a bit, really just fill the frame with the style. And this, by the way, as well, zooming in a little bit will actually increase that depth of field, that shallow depth of field effect, whereby the background is going to be a little bit blurry. And this is great, and it's limitless. So let me just grab this shot now. In fact, I'm going to underexpose a little bit just because I know my camera. So 1/125th of a second f4 ISO 100. Lovely, perfect histogram. And yeah, it's limitless. You can do anything. So I mean, even look at this here. Look at this tiny little sort of hole. Let me see if I can get down here to show you. So what I'm going to try and do is find a way where I can get the view, the vista in the background. But I'm doing it the opposite this time, so I'm still shooting at f4, but I'm going to focus through that little gap in the rock there. There we go. So I'm focused on the background. The rock is in fact going to be blurry. It's going to be very dark in the foreground. Let me just get that focused off there. There we go, lovely. And then again, f4 one 120. In fact, I'm going to bring that back up a little bit, and it's like see how that's like framing the vista in that little hole in the wall. ISO 100 f4 1/60th of a second. Let's grab that. Lovely. And again, these are just things that I'd never ever do like with my camera. And then, for example, say if we're gonna keep it at f4, see how this wall kind of leads us out into that vista there, and it's exactly the same as a little hole. Hang on. So we'll grab this, and I'm going to do the same again. So I'm focusing. Hi guys. All right, I'm focusing right off in the background, and what we're doing here, instead of shooting f9 f11, we're deliberately blurring that foreground, and it's an effect. So let me just do that here now. So the settings are going to be pretty much the same for every shot, I'd say, because the light obviously hasn't changed at all. So 1/60th f4 and ISO 100. It's not ideal because you can see there the wall's kind of leading out the way. It's going left, it's kind of going the wrong way. So I'm going to use the rule of thirds. Lovely. We haven't overexposed any of them highlights, and this is class because honestly you can kind of leave your camera in f4, and you know, if you haven't got a lens that kind of goes that wide open, f4, you can still get this same effect, and it's mint because you can just wander around and do the same thing, get these deliberate shallow depths of fields on like foreground elements, or like we did with the style with that first image, you can do it the other way around. So I mean, even look how cool these rocks are, guys. Look at that, that is class. So zoom out a little bit, and again, we're gonna focus on the rock, and if anything, it's gonna really put emphasis on this rock, or these rocks. Let's get these three in the foreground. It's really gonna put emphasis on them in the foreground because they're gonna be in focus. The background is gonna be completely out of focus. So let's try that there. 1/60th f4, ISO 100. Absolutely class. I'm just gonna do that again because I potentially overexposed. Let's try it 1/100th. Lovely. Oh, it's just cool. And again, something that I really wouldn't do that often, and I think people generally, landscape photographers I should say, definitely wouldn't do it. You'll see it a lot in street photography. You know, I'd urge you to watch some street photography videos on YouTube. I absolutely love them, and you can really see the creative ways in which you can, you know, play around with a shallow depth of field. It is fantastic. Right, so that's a little bit long-winded there. Well, let's crack on up Cloffer Pike, see what else we can find, and we'll talk a little bit more about aperture, of course. So I'm going to grab another quick one here, and again what I want is the foreground to be blurred and the background to be nicely in focus. So let's get the camera on. That's a fantastic bit of advice for you if you want to take a photograph. Make sure you get it on. So yeah, same again as before, guys. We're focusing on the background, and we're, like I say, deliberately blurring out the foreground. But what's going to be cool here is it's going to be really, really blurry right in the foreground here, where we've got these sort of grey coloured areas of heather, and then it's going to slowly come into focus, and it'll snap into focus around here somewhere. And I absolutely love that effect as well. I'm zoomed right in at 35mm, which again is going to increase the blur, let's say, that we have in the foreground. So ISO 100 f4, 1/160th of a second, and look at the sky. Look at that. That is absolutely beautiful. So let's grab that now. Rule of thirds. Bosh, absolutely glorious, stunning. I'll tell you what, we're getting quite a few patches of light now across sort of Morecambe Bay and stuff. You never know, you never know. So this one's definitely going to be the best example so far, I'd like to think. Beautiful dry stone wall leading us down into Morecambe Bay and into actually quite a substantial amount of the Lake District fells back there. I think Coniston Old Man. So cool. And just going back to something I was saying earlier, I'd just never do this sort of thing usually. Always f9, f10, f11, f8, something like that, you know, to make sure I get everything in focus. So here, 1/125th f4, ISO 100. Beauty. So we should have a nice Nicely out of focus and blurred in the foreground. It'll just fall into focus as we get to some of the big names back there. Coniston Old Man, and of course beautiful Morecambe Bay. So it's blowing a gale now. Whoa! He's nearly on the deck. It's blowing a gale now. I'm taking shelter behind my dry stone wall. This is class. We're back in action, guys. Back in the element and the real British weather. So there's one more thing that I want to talk about with regards to aperture, why I think we should open up our aperture on occasion, even as landscape photographers, even shooting wide vistas, that sort of thing. And it makes a lot of sense. It's definitely something I don't do a lot. Don't think I'll do it too often, but it's an option, you know. I love to be out, especially when I haven't got a tripod, knowing that I've got all these different options with regards to how I choose to use my camera as the photographer. Sweet. So we'll get into that. I'm going to get a little bit further up now, probably up to the peak actually, and I'll talk you guys through that. Let's battle against these elements. Goodness me, the winds have picked up now. Oh, it's proper weather. Right, we're chilling out on a rock, guys. Look at this, we're living the dream. Relaxing, gorgeous view in the background. This is where we talk about this next little bit of aperture as we get these little hikers approaching on us. I always feel like I'm winding people up, like they just want to have a chat and they're thinking, oh no, he's filming, everybody be quiet. I'll tell you what, I absolutely love this sort of scene. This is Forest of Bowland Lake District, Snowdonia, Scotland. This is it. Moody, look at the clouds. We've got a few little bits of remnants of snow down there. I hope you can see that, all these crags. Oh, it is just gloom and doom, and I mean that in the most beautiful way possible. Now, admittedly, we're not going to have the best example here, guys, so I apologise. So we're going to have to use our imaginations. Aperture, right, so much of the time as landscape photographers, like I've been saying, we want to shoot at f9 or f11, something like that. Now if we've got a tripod, we can do that. So if you use your tripod all the time like I usually do, this is this is completely and utterly irrelevant, I have to be honest with you. But if you've been watching me a lot recently, you'll know I've been shooting handheld, and this, like I said before, it's just great to have the option. All right, so say, for example, right, let's get this composition locked in. I'm focusing on them crags down there. ISO 100 f4, and then as I'm choosing my shutter speed, it's telling me 1/80th of a second. But say it was a lot darker, and to get the correct exposure, I needed to shoot at, say, 1/3 of a second. Now on my camera, I cannot shoot at such a slow shutter speed. So what I would usually do is, no, I still want to shoot at f9. I'm not shooting at f11, and I would sort of reluctantly increase my ISO. Oh yeah, you're right. Reluctantly increase my ISO, but then of course we've always got the other option of opening up our apertures, which again, like I said before, I just never do that. I never want to do it, and it's usually because I don't want to have a kind of shallow depth of field. But if we're shooting a vista like this, you know, unlike the other shots that we've been taking, we don't have anything in the immediate foreground like we did with the dry stone wall or the stile earlier. It's just a big vista, so we don't have to worry about depth of field. But then the other thing that I've always worried about is sharpness. You know, I know that my lens, or this 16 to 35mm lens, performs perfectly at around about f9, so I'm always reluctant to shoot at f4. But if you need to open up your aperture a little bit more to get more light into the lens so that you can have a quicker shutter speed because you're shooting handheld, what I would urge you to do is do a few tests with your lens at home. I've done a few with this lens, and shooting at f4 compared to shooting at f8, yes, it's a little bit sharper at f8 or f9, honestly, or f11, something like that. Honestly, it's really not that much of a difference. We get a little bit more of a blur in the corners of the image, and in this sort of scene, you know what, it doesn't bother me at all. But I'm going to get this shot here anyway, f4, whatever my shutter speed wants to be, at 1/30th of a second. Focus on them crags, and you're going to see here there's going to be no problem with depth of field. and definitely no problem with sharpness. Actually, there we go, 1/60th of a second. That is a beautiful gloomy scene, absolutely gorgeous. So once again, a little bit long-winded, but I hope that makes sense to you. Just remember to sum up really, you've always got that option of opening up your aperture rather than increasing your ISO, and if there's nothing in the immediate foreground, and as per your tests, if you're confident it's not going to dramatically affect the sharpness in a negative way of your image, just open up your aperture, don't worry about it. The wind's picked up, it's nippy. I just had a nice little chat with these two here, Gosha and Luke. I think they're going to watch, I think they're going to search my channel on YouTube, so nice to meet you both. I must admit, when I'm out and about at the minute, because of the lockdown and stuff, just not socialising. I don't see any of my mates or any of my family, so I'm just like mad to chat to people. It's quite nice. Oh guys, I've come back out the wind a little bit. It is nippy, let me tell you, it is nippy. Giving it the big one before at the start about how warm it was. Oh, right, so aperture, I really hope you've enjoyed it. And again, it's all just about options. You don't have to go out and shoot an open aperture all the time, but like I said, especially with that last one, it's nice to have that option. You can choose, you know, if I want to increase my ISO, then I'll do that. If I want to open my aperture at this instance, you know, you might be reluctant to increase your ISO. It might be really dark. You could do both. You can increase your ISO a little bit, open up your aperture a little bit, you know. You've got these options as a photographer, and that is amazing. Again, especially when you're not using a tripod. Right, I'm going home. I'm had for a cup of tea. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. As always, if you have a quick second, if you could spare me one, please give the video a thumbs up. It really helps my content here on YouTube. And yeah, cheers for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next adventure.